So a few months ago, I did a tour of the United States reading from my new book, and had to raise some funds to make the tour happen. And one of the things I offered people that contributed was that I'd make a video about anything they wanted me to make a video about. And my dear friend Bruno, in case you want to know who to blame, asked me to make a video about the meaning of life. And needless to say, it took me a very long time to do this. I've spent several months trying to figure out how I wanted to attack that question and what I could possibly say, what to film, how to make a video that addressed that. And finally it hit me that the question of the meaning of life was actually at the heart of how I began the essay writing project that I was on tour reading from. Before I began that project, I went through a very long and painful writer's block that was difficult to recover from. And at the beginning of the essay writing project, the audience books, I was in Bratislava with our friend Markus Hansen. He's a tremendous artist and a big influence on me. And he was asking me why I couldn't write. And a lot of it came down to the idea that it didn't matter if I wrote, and it didn't matter what I wrote about, because I felt that nothing meant anything. It didn't mean anything if I wrote, it didn't mean anything if I didn't write, it didn't mean anything if I wrote about fire trucks, and it didn't mean anything if I wrote about garbage cans or trips to the Bahamas or love or death or soccer or whatever. And Markus ultimately solved that problem by suggesting that he'd tell me what to write about, and then I wouldn't have an excuse not to write, because the reason or the meaning would be that it was what he wanted to hear, and I wouldn't have to decide that it meant something for me to write about a certain subject. And so he started giving me titles, and I started writing essays about his titles, and that's how the project began, where I wrote all these essays about things that other people suggested I write about. And during that conversation with Markus, there was a point where he was sort of, grilling me about the nature of my writer's block and asking me why I was so paralyzed, or why the meaninglessness of things was stopping me from writing. And I remember saying to him, well, if it doesn't mean anything, why do it? Everything's arbitrary. There's no objective kind of source meaning. There's no obvious good. There's no clear reason. There's no clear good reason for me to write about something. So why do it? And Markus's answer, which stuck with me for a long time, was then why not do it? And what he said to me that for some reason was difficult for me to ingest, but later went on to make a great deal of sense, was that if everything's arbitrary, then so is deciding that it's meaningless. That's an arbitrary decision, and so is deciding not to do it. That's an arbitrary decision. I could equally, if things are truly arbitrary and truly lack an objective meaning, then I could equally decide that there is a reason to do something, or I could equally decide that it is important, that it is meaningful. And that conversation with Markus, which kind of exposed a fallacy in my own logic about my life, also opened the floodgates on a big writing project. When I realized that by all the same reasoning that I wasn't writing, that I wasn't doing things, I could apply those reasons and decide to do things, and decide to celebrate the arbitrary nature of their meaning, or that I had free artistic and creative reign to decide on their meaning, to infuse things with meaning. And what Markus called this was making the arbitrary a positive, turning the arbitrary into a strength. And he took the time to talk to me a lot about that idea, and since then I've been viewing meaning as something that we create for ourselves. And when people talk about being in some search of meaning, or talk about their frustration that things are meaningless, or that things seemingly lack meaning, or they're trying to find meaning. I think a lot of us, I know I have, and I think a lot of us make the mistake of looking for meaning outside ourselves, like we're going to just look into the sky until we find meaning, or look into some book until we find meaning, or look into other people's wisdom, or human history, or the stars, or love, or religion, or anything, until we find that meaning, and we look and we look and we don't find it. And I think that the way I look at it now is that we don't find it because it's not where we're looking. It's not there. It's not outside us. We have to decide to see it. We have to decide to put it somewhere. We have to decide what it is. We have to decide what meaning means. Meaning's just a word. We have to decide to use that word, and we have to come to some accord with ourselves about what we want that word to mean or imply when we use it. And then once we decide what we want it to mean, we can apply it where we see fit. We can allot meaning. We can bestow meaning. We can allocate meaning wherever we choose. We can decide that there's meaning in our work, or there's meaning in our art, or there's meaning in our relationships. There's meaning in our participation in society, but that meaning only comes from our decision to endorse or to validate it as meaning. And we can equally decide to take meaning out of things, but if we decide that nothing means anything, that's still our decision. That's still an arbitrary decision, and that there's nothing making us decide on meaninglessness any more than there's anything making us decide on meaning. And so wherever we find discomfort with the idea that there's no meaning, we can rectify that instantly. We can comfort ourselves by erecting whatever meaning we want to experience for ourselves and even for other people. And I try to find meaning by creating that meaning in the things that I do, and then looking for it there. And I hope that maybe other people who are wrestling with that might be able to create the meaning in what they do, whether or not what I'm doing is meaningful to them or helps them embrace that idea. I guess that part isn't really important, but it was important to me that Markus made that notion of the creation of meaning as a canvas, as a play area for the creative mind. That he made that idea available to me, and that was important to me at a time when the notion of meaning was a real struggle. And so I wanted to talk about that and to pass that on, and I hope that Bruno finds that interesting, and I hope that you do too.